Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of Rogue Deck Rundown. Today I'll be going over Gimmick Puppets. So let's get started. Gimmick Puppets is a deck that revolves around making rank 8s and 9s and doing burn damage. There's a couple builds you can go for. There's a Machina build, there's a standard rank 8 and 9 build. What I'm going over today is the standard rank 8 and 9 build, just because I feel like it represents Gimmick Puppets a little bit better. Okay, so the deck's main engine revolves around Jury Doll. And what Jury Doll does is once per turn, you can banish another Gimmick Puppet from your graveyard and special summon Jury Doll from the graveyard. So it's basically going to provide you with constant rank 8 fodder. Something to notice about this card, it can only be used as a Exceed material for Gimmick Puppet, so that does offer a bit of a limitation to what you can go for. So once you have Jury Doll in your graveyard, you basically have this recurring engine to where you can start making rank 8s based on what you have in your hand. As far as other level 8s go, you can choose to run Magnet Doll, which special summons itself if you control a Gimmick Puppet and your opponent controls a card. You can run the Machina engine, or you can run Gearspring Spirit, which is also a pretty good card. It does have a limitation to where you must have only machine type monsters in your graveyard, so it kind of limits you as to whether you can run hand traps or other exceeds. What I chose to run is Barbaros, Beast King Barbaros, because it does pair up pretty well with Skill Drain. And I mean, aside from that, it does offer you a 1900 beat stick. Once you do start making those exceeds, your most likely candidates are going to be number 15 Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder and number 40 Gimmick Puppet of Strings. Now you can run Leo if you want to, but I honestly wouldn't advise it, just because it does take 3 materials to make it. But by all means, if you are going for that separate win condition build, go ahead. Both of your main exceeds are okay in their own right. They both do burn damage and they both destroy monsters on the field. But what really makes the deck worthwhile is Rank Up Magic Argent Chaos Force. Essentially what this card allows you to do is bring out a rank 9 C or C exceed over your rank 8s. And your most viable choice is going to be Coach Lord Ultimate Trainer. And what it does is it can't be targeted, and once per turn, as long as it has an XYZ monster as a material, you can draw 1 card, and if it is a monster that you draw, you inflict 800 damage to your opponent. So it's an all-around good card. It's a 38 body that can be targeted, and it offers you a little mini draw engine. And the cool thing is, this deck pumps it out like nobody's business. I usually have this card out turn 1 even, turn 1 or turn 2. And I forgot to mention, Argent Force does have this effect to where, if it's in your graveyard, if you special summon a rank 5 or higher monster, you can add it to your hand, and that's once per duel. So even if I don't have it in my hand opening turn, if I can get a way to send it to the graveyard, like with Levolval Chain, I can still go for that Ultimate Trainer, provided I can still make a rank 8 that turn. Aside from Coach Trainer, you do have your rank 9 Gimmick Puppets. You have Giant Hunter, which is good for spot removal. Once per turn you can destroy a card your opponent controls, and if that card was a monster, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. And you do have mass removal in the form of Dark Strings. The main combo for that would be to go into number 40 to put string counters on your opponent's monsters as well as yours, and then go into Dark Strings. And what Dark Strings does is, when he's special summoned onto the field, you destroy all monsters on the field with string counters, and you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the monster with the largest attack that was destroyed, and you get to draw a card afterwards. So I mean, these cards are good for what they do. I mean, you get mass removal and spot removal, but ultimately what you do want to end up going for is Coach Lord, because it does offer you that field presence because it can't be targeted. So your main win condition for this deck is ultimately going to be a combination of beatdown and burn damage. Jury Doll is going to allow you to go into rank 8s essentially every turn, as long as you have level 8 that you can summon in your hand. You can go for level 4s, and the only ones that I choose to run are, rank 4s. The only 3 that I choose to run are Levolval Chain, 101, and Exciton, just because they offer the most utility. So the deck is good, but it's not great. There's a lot of things that I wish it had. For instance, those your effect monsters, your Jury Doll, your Magnet Doll, that's all they're good for. They're good for level 8s and as rank 8 fodder. They don't do anything on their own, and that's ultimately what deters me from this deck. If they could do something on their own, then it'd probably be a better deck, but as it stands, they don't. Another problem I had with this deck is that it's not very consistent. You do run into hands where, like, you can't do anything, you brick. And because of that, I do run draw power, like trade-in and upstart, but trade-in does have problems with itself, just because sometimes you do open hands where trade-in would be great in your hand, and you do have hands where you have trade-in and you have no level 8s. Something else that I run is reckless. If you draw multiple reckless grades, it's really good just because you do have a greater chance of drawing to the cards you need. But yeah, in my opinion, this deck really needs a search card in order for it to be really good. The biggest problem I found with this deck is the limitations that are associated with Jury Doll. You can't make generic rank 8s. The only way you can make generic rank 8s is if you have Barbaros or multiple magnet dolls. And that really is a problem because you're so limited, the deck becomes really linear. And to be honest, the rank 8 Gimmick Puppets are kind of lackluster. Giant Killer is really situational to where your opponent has to control a special summon monster, and the only way you get like its full value is if they control an XYZ, and that's not always possible. Strings is good in tandem with Argent Force, just because you can go into Dark Strings, but that's not always going to happen, and when you don't have Argent Force, then you're stuck with a rank 8 that really doesn't do anything. It's a big beater, and it does have an effect to where you place counters on your opponent's monsters, and they're destroyed at the end of their turn. But when you're trying to go for a push, that's not necessarily always the best thing. It's going to stay on the field, and your opponent's going to have an answer for it next turn. And a lot of the times, I feel like this deck doesn't have a lot of protection, or can't run a lot of protection, just because you fill this deck up with draw power and stuff to mitigate its consistency issues. And so you fall victim to traps a lot. You fall victim to Torrential and Mirror Force and a whole bunch of other cards. I mean, this isn't to say that this deck doesn't have its pros. For one, if your opponent isn't running a deck that doesn't run trap cards, then this deck just excels against that. You bring out these big ass monsters and you do burn damage, and it becomes really overwhelming for your opponent to deal with a rank 8 every turn. Something cool about this deck though is that no one really knows what it does. They don't know when to play their cards right, and so you take advantage of that a lot, just because they don't know how powerful your CXYZ monsters are. But the greatest advantage this deck has, ultimately for me, is the fact that it can run skill drain. All your monsters are really big, and you have ways to get them without using monster effects. And so you're basically bringing out a 3000 beater every turn. And what's not to like about that? So ultimately the deck is really fun. I love the art, which is what initially drew me to this deck. But it's not the best deck. It has a lot of problems. And until those problems can be mitigated with new releases, I don't ever see this deck topping or anything. But it is really fun. It is a really fun deck. Okay, so I'll go ahead and leave you guys with this deck list. Opinions on it are welcome. If you guys have any suggestions on what other decks you want me to profile for this series, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. I love you. Bye.